This is one of Cluny the Scourge's online Rome Total War matches, and I'm playing as the Julii, facing off against Blizzybee, playing as the Seleucids. I've taken 6 units of Roman archers, deployed in loose formation in front of my infantry, one first cohort legionary unit, which I've taken for the morale boosting legionary standard, 5 units of legionaries, 2 of Samnite gladiators, and for my cavalry 5 units of praetorians. I've deployed most of my infantry in the woods to begin with, in order to deceive the opponent as to the configuration of my force. Now, Blizzybee has taken, of his troops that were visible at the beginning of the battle, 4 units of silver shield pikemen deployed in long thin lines, presumably in an attempt to discourage envelopments, 3 units of cataphracts heavily upgraded, and 4 units of archers, which he has deployed behind his pikemen. Since he has only taken 4, and from the positioning of his bowmen, it would seem safe to deduce that Blizzybee does not intend any kind of prolonged missile duel, which seems a wise choice given the extensive forest land on this map. When your troops are in tree cover, they receive protection from archery, and thus it is less effective. I now deploy my cavalry into the woods on the left of my main body. My intention is to try to lure the enemy to strike me in my center, discouraging him from attacking me on my left, hence the presence of the cavalry. I reveal some of my infantry by rushing them backwards. He can now see where my new battle line is, and I'm hoping that he will send his army against it, while my infantry units on the left, who I have not moved and hence have remained hidden from the beginning, will be unknown to him, and they will be able to burst upon his flank. Fearful of his cataphracts, I move my Praetorian cavalry even further back, all the way behind my army. Cataphracts, if they switch to their maces, will rip Praetorians apart. Perhaps I've made a mistake already. Perhaps it would have been better to leave my cavalry out in the open, in the hope that my opponent would concentrate upon it, and then I could swing my entire main body out around the flank. However, I don't think he would have been that foolish. A force of unsupported cavalry conveniently sitting right next to a forest would have been a little suspicious. Now my opponent makes a mistake in the use of his bowmen. Once they come within range of mine, and I begin firing, he selects them all and double right clicks to have them rush to fire upon mine. What he should have done was rush them forward to a position within range of mine, and then leave them to settle themselves and begin firing at will. That way they would still be in proper loose formation, instead of being compressed together as you see here, and therefore much more vulnerable to my missiles. What has happened there is that each individual archer in each unit has stopped the moment he came within range, instead of giving thought to the unit's need for a loose configuration as a whole. My opponent has been maneuvering his cataphracts as though to make a move against my left, and so, as you saw, I moved my Praetorians even further back, hoping that he will strike against my infantry, and then I can swing around his flank and envelop him with my horsemen. Now his cataphracts approach, and they discover the hidden infantry units that I had hoped to use to swing around on the left. And then he springs his surprise. 2 more heavily upgraded cataphract units, which had been hidden, and which he had patiently and with great discipline left unmoving right from the beginning of the battle. He had me completely fooled there. I thought that I was facing only 3 cavalry units. Now, as I've rushed my left-hand infantry forward to engage those cataphracts, hoping to rely on the combat penalty that horsemen suffer when fighting in woodland, I'm facing more horsemen than I expected. He's able to concentrate high numbers of super heavy horsemen against me there on my left, and I am panicked into rushing my Praetorians in and fail to achieve a proper envelopment. It's looking very bad for me on the left, unless I can rush more infantry from the right to support them. Unfortunately, my opponent has the same idea, and without my legionary standard, it's inspiring my troops all the way over on my far right, who aren't even facing any kind of serious threat. Those Praetorians and infantry on my left aren't doing as well as they might be. His cataphracts are heavily upgraded, my Praetorians are unupgraded. He definitely has the upper hand. Now, when he sends infantry to support that melee on the left, he does so rushing them in out of phalanx formation. That's wise, in order to get them there more swiftly, but he double right clicks to send them to attack, rather than simply moving them into position before the melee and then hitting the F key to put them into phalanx, which means that they attack with their swords at first, and it costs him precious time while he reorganises his men into a proper phalanx formation where they will take out their sarissa pikes. And pikemen, of course, simply aren't up to the standard of legionaries fighting hand to hand. Now over on the right, his thin lines of pikemen have been caught by my legionaries as I swing around to achieve envelopments. I catch him on the hop and I kill his general, a lucky coup for me, which I'm going to need if I'm going to pull this off. The situation on my left being so dire. Now, I've sent troops into the rear of those pikemen, which he sent to support the left, and he's done the same again to those troops, creating a double envelopment in the centre. In short, it isn't looking good for me anywhere. Now, he isn't making much use of his maces with the cataphracts on the left. I've only seen a single unit who were using the maces rather than lances. You pull your mace out by holding down the Alt key and ordering them to attack. That renders the heavy armour of Roman legionaries more or less useless. He would have crushed my left much more swiftly if he had done so with all of his cataphracts. Then he could have transferred them to the centre and right more quickly. Here on the far right, that's the enemy general's unit with the general dead. You can see that my opponent is pursuing a tactic of interposing pikemen between my forces on the right and the centre, so that he can prevent me from getting men to where they're needed. It's a question now of whether he can do so for long enough for him to complete the process of destroying me in the centre and bringing those cataphracts over from the left. As you can see, I've broken through, however, and now I'm rushing toward the centre, and it will come down to a decision now. My opponent did a good job of keeping my legionary standard, so poorly placed, away from where it was most needed to inspire my men, but now it's finally drawn into the centre, and we can see how my troops will handle the situation. I will make one criticism here, that my opponent throughout deployed his pikemen in long thin lines, so they were unable to make maximum use of the defensive capability of their sarissas. Pikemen work best when they are at least in 5 ranks, so that you can present 5 rows of spears to your opponent. Personally, I prefer an 8-ranked sarissa formation for best effect. Otherwise, they can be penetrated too easily. Now, you notice there that I sent that legionary first cohort around the left to outflank the enemy, instead of simply letting them queue up behind the legionaries in front, waiting for them to die so they could get their turn to attack. So I managed to rout those troops in the centre. The cataphracts, who are exhausted from continual fighting and suffering a combat penalty in the woodlands, and are now facing infantry inspired by a legionary standard, broke. Plus, he didn't have all of his cataphracts where they were needed. As you can see there, he had some away over to one side, pursuing routing troops. I was therefore able to concentrate more effectively than he was, and with my men inspired by the legionary standard, and with my opponents under incendiary attack from my Roman archers at the rear, who are able to use their fire arrows to provoke a panic-inducing effect in the enemy, I'm able to rout the last of his troops. His archers, on the other hand, are unable to do the same to me at this critical moment, because my bowmen have more or less destroyed his due to his mishandling of them in the opening missile duel. So, how have I Inspector Clouseau'd my way into victory here, which I didn't really deserve? The Seleucids did not make sufficient use of their cataphracts' maces. They mishandled their use of archers, they attacked in phalanxes that were too thin, and more than one unit of pikemen was permitted to attack with their swords in the centre when they were needed, instead of forming up properly first.